Is AI creative? Can it make real art? Is AI conscious? Does it have interiority and sentience? Is it alive? We think that these are the wrong questions when it comes to AI. If we ask the questions we currently ask, it's a little bit as if we address the new in terms of the old. Asking better questions would mean to address AI in terms of its newness, to learn to think the new in terms of the new. Why do we even ask if AI is conscious? I think we ask that question because we have experiences with AI that makes us assume it must have some form of interiority or mind or consciousness. It appears to understand what we say. It appears to think enough to give responses specific to what we were saying. And it's very difficult for us to not think that understanding, having words and giving thoughtful responses, having some form of agency is not reflective of consciousness or more broadly of interiority, an intentional mind, a self. We think that that consciousness, mind, interiority is more or less a human thing. So the fact that AI can have that too is slightly scary or is slightly confusing because we don't normally assume that a technical system can have interiority or consciousness, right? Where does the term consciousness or the configuration of humans in terms of consciousness come from? When did that idea first emerge? And there is something slightly confusing about asking this because we tend to think that humans were always conscious. Consciousness is the hallmark of the human. It is what has made humans human since time immemorial. Strange as it sounds, consciousness has not always existed. In fact, the very word consciousness and the description of humans in terms of consciousness only emerges in the 17th century in the second edition of John Locke's essay concerning human understanding. And whenever I say something like this, people are confused. What do you mean? Like how did humans exist before? How were they experiencing themselves? What do you mean they didn't have consciousness? One way to articulate the difference in how humans understood themselves and experienced themselves before the term consciousness existed is provided by the history of the term mind. Today we take it for granted that mind is interiority, is an inner mind. But in ancient Greek, for example, mind, the word for mind was nous, was something that existed outside humans. Nous was the word for divine mind. It was the divine mind that animated the cosmos. It was the divine mind that dreamed up the eternal ideas that Plato was writing about. And so the assumption of the ancient Greeks was that some humans have received the spark of this divine mind, of the nous, and that they could participate in the divine mind almost by elevating themselves above their humanity, almost by sort of leaving their humanity behind and elevating themselves into the outside divine mind. So in ancient Greece, having a mental experience was not something that happens inside of you, but it's something that sort of lifts you outside of you. And maybe that makes plausible that the task of finding the truth about you was not by attending or discovering the truth inside of you, but was by leaving yourself behind and becoming part of this outside mind and becoming human in terms of the eternal idea of the human. In ancient Rome, it was very similar as in ancient Greece. The term for mind was mens, and mens again was referring to an outside reality. It was referring to the divine mind that organized the cosmos. And so having a mental experience again meant to lift yourself above yourself and participate in the cosmic divine mind. Well, the historical place where this changed that we can point to, where for the first time is notably different, is John Locke's essay concerning human understanding, the second edition. And Locke's explicit reference actually is Plato. And he says, well, Plato had this idea that the mind is the outside world, and in the outside world mind is the divine mind that is organizing the outside world, and it's in the divine mind that these eternal ideas that organize the cosmos rest and can be discovered. And Locke said, that's actually wrong. Mind's not outside, mind is inside. And ideas are not things that have eternally existed. Rather, ideas are something that is formed inside of our mind through the haptic experiences that we have. So the body for Locke was a kind of sensory apparatus, and each time we touched something and had a sensory experience, in our mind an idea got formed, and inside our mind, according to Locke, resides this thing called self or consciousness that examines the ideas that we form, that can refine them as we gain more experiences, that can look for connections between these ideas, and the more connections it discovers, the more knowledge, so to speak, you have. According to Locke, consciousness doesn't exist at the time you're born. It exists maybe as a potential, but there is nothing there yet. You discover yourself as you get older and make experiences. So consciousness is deeply shaped by your biography. It's a deeply individual version of experiencing yourself. Ever since Locke, we take it for granted that understanding, speech, agency is reflective of an individual subjective interiority that is shaped by your biographical experience and your form of existence. So whatever you do, whatever you say, however you understand me, is true to your individual experience, to your interiority. It's in Locke that this connection between understanding, language, agency, and consciousness for the first time emerges. And it's when we ask, is AI conscious? Then we approach AI from the perspective of the 17th century conceptual configuration of humans. The alternative is to ask if AI offers us an opportunity to think again, to look at the 17th century conceptual configuration and ask if we could think this differently. There is one obvious first step that one can take, and that is, apparently, there is no necessary link between understanding and language, or having words and agency and consciousness, because there is a thing, AI, that appears to be able to have understanding and words or language and agency and is not conscious. So just noting that there is no necessary link between understanding and language and consciousness actually takes away the age of scariness from AI. Why? Well, because we now don't need to wonder how it is possible that a technical, lifeless, non-conscious technical system suddenly has interiority, mind, and consciousness. How is that possible? Is there some form of magical leap that has happened? So noticing that it is perfectly possible, apparently, to have understanding language without having consciousness takes the edge away from that. There's a second fascinating possibility, and that is, could we devise a vocabulary for thinking about things like understanding and language that doesn't need consciousness, that can cover both humans and AI? That may at first sound confusing, but my goal is not to sort of nivellate obvious differences between humans and AI. I do think they're quite different. But the question that I'm intrigued by is there a possibility of thinking about them without evoking ontological, almost metaphysical differences between humans and AI? Is there an opportunity to rethink who we are, what our place is in the world, outside of the sort of human exceptionalism that is built into Locke's conception of human as ultimately the only conscious thing in the world? This is just one example of what it could look like to take a step back from the question, is AI conscious, with all the scariness that rings in that question, that sort of circulates in that question, and instead say, well, What if AI is a conceptual event? Is AI an event on the level of the history of concepts that we have lived by? Is AI an invitation to revise those concepts? Does AI force us to revise those concepts? And think about ourselves, about what it is to be human in the world today differently.